Hello everyone. Today we're going to be covering the basics of the interface for Adobe Animate CC. As you might have worked in other programs within the Adobe ecosystem, you probably have found correlations between the different programs. There are items like tools or presets which belong to the entire ecosystem. And as such, they make it easy for you to navigate from one program to the next. Adobe Animate is not any different than all those other programs. They include certain things that are common to all the programs, and yet there are things that are brand new. If you are new to animation, this program will include quite a lot of wealth of knowledge, new things that you haven't touched in other programs. If you are familiar with animation or have worked with other programs such as Adobe After Effects, or any animation program, say 3D programs and such, perhaps Toon Boom, then you probably are quite familiar with most of the concepts in this program. The only advantage that this program offers in that case is the interactivity portion of things, the ability to manipulate timelines in such a way that you can allow the user to choose different options on how the program will respond to the user input. So with that in mind, let's just take a look at the interface really quick. The first thing that you encounter when you open up Adobe Animate CC is a set of presets, and you can go ahead and start a file fast, as it says here, which basically provides you with a preset for the settings that you're going to be working with based on whatever your need is. So most of the time, you probably will be producing animation in Full HD, which would be the option under this preset. If you're working with mobile device in mind, if you're trying to create something that is targeted to mobile devices, then you probably work on Android or iPad. So it all depends on what your settings are. These are the most common settings based on what most people work with in the industry. However, you can always create your own by simply going into Create New and or opening a new file if the one is available that you have been working on or that you have received from someone and you want to work with. So let's, for example, say I want to create a new document. When I click on Create New, I get a pop-up window that will offer me yet another set of templates to choose from based on whether I want to do character animation, social media applets, games, education, ads, web, and so on. And underneath each one of those, you will notice that different templates will be available to you down here below. This is not new to the Adobe programs. Most programs have a sort of template format, a templated format that allows you to work from scratch with a bit of a preset work done for you, pre-production work. You can also click Advanced, which allows you to create from scratch based on other technologies such as VR and or specific targets like apps for iOS or Android or even for desktop. So as you can see, the environment, the Adobe and Animate CC environment is not specific to animation only. It is actually targeted to animation with interactivity in mind. So it's giving you the possibility to create something that will be hitting several targets at the same time. And ultimately, that's the goal of working with an environment like this, where we are not just targeting one program to one specific platform, but we have one program that feeds several platforms. So with this in mind, you will also notice that as I change through the different templates, the icons in these templates change. You'll notice that under character animation, I get what looks like a playback head. These icons are related to the format that you see in this area. Which platform type are you targeting? The default platform target for Adobe Animate is ActionScript 3.0, and that is the native, what we used to call Flash environment. So Adobe Animate is the latest iteration of the Flash environment. It uses the Flash technology as the engine, but it's not just Flash anymore. It actually allows you to do quite a lot more. And as a matter of fact, most of the people that I know that work in the industry use it as the first stepping stone to developing HTML5 content. So you can actually work a lot of the little work or the design portion of the work in other instances in this environment before you actually move to full development. You can also use it as a prototyping platform instead of using Adobe XD. So I mean, there's plenty of opportunities here to work with the program. Now, you'll notice that if I go to social, for example, I have Facebook Target, which is HTML5 Canvas. Or if I Twitter, ActionScript 3. So it depends on which platform you are working with that your platform type will change. You'll also notice that this is a drop-down menu. So the drop-down menu allows you to choose other than what it gives you by default. However, the default that it chooses for you is based on the most commonly used format that the people working in the industry work with. So you'll notice that you have the ability to switch that format if you want to. But the program will give you the default that it knows will be probably used for your target. It is important for you at this step to make sure that whatever you are creating, whatever format you choose, targets mostly what you're going to be producing at the end. Meaning, keep in mind what your target is going to be, because making a change to that halfway will change quite a lot of things within your program. So when you're creating these programs or applets within Adobe Animate, the target is extremely important. If you're working with something that is ActionScript 3.0 based, which is the native program, then your target will be something that is based on Flash technology, something that will run on a desktop, or based on the iOS, the OS that you're working with. It will change based on that. It will accept the actual scripting language if you use any. If you're using this program for animation strictly and it's going to be web-based, then you will work with HTML5 Canvas. Now, ActionScript 3.0 and HTML5 Canvas use a very similar background language that is used across the web, which it's called JavaScript. Basically, ActionScript 3.0 and JavaScript are cousins. So the scripting format is very much the same. However, they are two completely separate languages. And as such, it's not simple to simply translate ActionScript into JavaScript. You have to recode everything. But if it, in terms of animation, you should be able to export directly just animation as is, a timeline directly onto HTML5 without any issues, as you will see in the exercises that we do throughout the semester. So keep in mind that ActionScript and JavaScript are what we call OOP languages, and they're basically open object programs. And that means you have the ability to create nuggets of code that will manipulate visuals or objects on the screen. So object-oriented programming, that's what OOP stands for, object-oriented programming. OOP is basically the format that is both used by ActionScript 3.0 and by JavaScript. So they are very similar. But know that they're not interchangeable. So ActionScript resides in a specific platform, while JavaScript is in a completely separate platform. We can use JavaScript online. We can use ActionScript 3.0 online, but it is construed, or it is reserved to Flash environments. As you might have heard, Google and other companies will be removing ActionScript support by the end of this year. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to remove ActionScript altogether. ActionScript is not only created for interactive media on the web, but for many other things on the market. So ActionScript is not going anywhere. It's actually increasing. It says actually ActionScript 3.0 is the latest iteration of the language. It's going to be evolving into something completely different, more of a developer-bound language. And at some point, I see both JavaScript and ActionScript marrying into one single language. But as of now, they remain separate, and it's something that we need to keep in mind. So with that said, we can also get to choose what the frame rate is for our program. Now, frame rate, if you're not familiar with animation, you will know what that means. But if you are, you'll know that frame rate is the speed of playback. So frame rate being the speed of playback means how many frames do I have to go through in an animation in order to complete 1 second. Right now, this is base 30, which means it's 30 frames per second. Every 30 frames equals 1 second of animation. The more frames you get, the smoother your animation, but the speed of playback affects the way your GPU works and your CPU works. So especially for web applications. So we want to make sure that we don't go beyond 30 FPS, which is regular speed of playback for animation on today actually. But you can go as low as 15 FPS, 10 FPS. Anything below 15 FPS will start looking jumpy. Imagine, if you will, where you, instead of having 30 images going through the screen for 1 second, you actually have half as many. Then your animation starts looking a little clunky. So you want to maintain it within 24 to 30 FPS for regular animations, or above if you have the capabilities for it. If your animations will ultimately go to video, then you want to stick around 30 and above. And that's because once you render this, instead of creating a program, you will most likely be creating a video. So you want to have as many frames as possible within your animation. So that's something to keep in mind. Frame rate is the speed of playback. And this is the rough size of your, not the rough size, the actual size of your canvas. Now, a canvas is the same thing as a composition window in After Effects, or an artboard in Illustrator, or a canvas in Photoshop. Basically, it is the live area, the area where you construct what you are about to export from the program. So whatever applet you're creating, whatever the user sees, that is the canvas. That's what we call the canvas, or in this case, what we call the stage. In the program, it's called the stage. In Adobe Animate CC, it's called stage. So we have the actual stage and the pasteboard, which is anything outside of the stage. Those are the two areas that you will see in just a second. So now I'm just going to use the standard size for now, just for showing you the example. Let me go ahead and click create on this without changing anything. And you'll notice that the program will provide me with a whole new interface. Now, this interface might be overwhelming at the beginning, but as you start working through it, you will notice that a lot of things link to the way you work in other programs, such as Photoshop or Illustrator. You'll notice that you have all your tools set on the left-hand side. And by the way, these are expandable, so you can make it 2 or 3, depending on how you work. You'll also notice that you have these 3 dots down here, and that those dots allow you to open up other tools that might be hidden, that are not as commonly used within the standard workspace, which is what we're working with. So you can simply go ahead and add them if you want to by clicking them and dragging them into the tools area. You can also take them out if you want to. Let me go ahead and close that really quick. Let me bring this back down to one side. So these things behave the same way as they do in other programs. You can also go ahead and take a look at over here, this whole area. Let me switch my tool to the selection tool. You'll notice that the whole area here is basically dark, and that is your pasteboard. That is the area that will not be live. Anything in this area will not be seen within your applet or program, whatever you're creating. Anything inside the white area, that is your construct. That is your canvas. That is what we call the stage. Now, the stage over here is married to what we look at down here, called the timeline. Now, the timeline, the concept of the timeline is basically, if you will be creating animation, then basically this little blue marker will be moving downstream on this timeline, meaning it's going to be advancing. So as you move forward, or to the right in this case, you basically will be going through time, where each one of these little spaces here, each one of these frames equals 1 frame of animation. And as we had said when we created the applet that you're looking at, we had said make the speed of playback of my app 30. Then that's why 30 frames equals 1 second. You see the 1 second marker right here. So 30 frames equals 1 second, 60 frames equals 2 seconds, and so on. So this will be playing downstream. That playback head will be going downstream. The little blue playback head will be going downstream as you play your animation. These are controllers for your timeline. Here in the timeline is where you will be building your basically your animations will be set up in this timeline. Whatever you build will be seen over here in your stage, on your stage. So therefore, the stage and the timeline are connected to one another. Now, you are now at the top level, which is what we call scene 1. You can have more than one scene in Adobe Animate CC. Scenes will play sequentially unless you tell them not to via code. So if you add code to say play in a different order, then the scenes will not play sequentially. But if you do not add any code, then the scenes will just simply play one after the other. You don't have to have several scenes in order to create a movie or to create an application. You can keep everything into one single scene, and as a matter of fact, most productions actually do that because we subdivide things into different people, different production artists. Every one of them will be creating separate scenes that we then compile into one whole program. If you're all working in one single program in different scenes, then the program will most likely will have more than one scene. But as of now, we're just going to work with one scene. And notice that we have what are called layers here. The concept of layers is the same as it is in After Effects. So if you have worked with After Effects, you are familiar with creating layers. Layers in After Effects are created by media that you add on to your construct. Over here, you need to physically create the layers in order to be able to, organize everything within your timelines. Now, as you will see in a couple of weeks, when we start adding animation to our timelines, you will notice that we need to have everything that is animated in its own separate layer. So every object that will be animated needs to reside within its own layer. Two things animated in one layer, it's a no-no. It's something that the program doesn't allow, and the reason for that is because it's looking at each layer as a piece of animation. So if you have two items animated in one layer, it's going to say which one of the two is my animation controlling. That's basically you're asking the program to control two things in one single layer, and the program doesn't know which one is which. So as you construct, keep that in mind, that all the elements that you are creating need to be in separate layers. So say, for example, you are animating a person's arm. The hand will be separate from the forearm, which will be separate from the upper arm. So if you want to animate the whole thing, if you want to animate the hand, the forearm, and the upper arm, basically each one of those pieces will reside in its own layer. They have to be separate. Over here, you'll notice that we have what we call the properties window. Since we have nothing selected, the properties that we're looking at right now are of the program itself, of the canvas. So it's telling us your program, your applet is 640 by 480. It's 30 FPS in speed, and it gives you a whole lot of other things that are specific to what you're working with, to the environment you're working on. Okay, this properties window is context specific, and what that means is if I create something on the stage, the properties will change to whatever I have selected at the moment. So if I created a let's say a circle or a rectangle, it will automatically change the properties from the stage or from the program to that rectangle. If I deselect the rectangle and I select nothing else, then it will come back to the settings of the stage or my program. So it is important to keep an eye on this properties, and then through the properties windows where we do most of the work when it comes to actually fine-tuning objects that we are creating. On the right-hand side, we have another set of presets or tools that, not presets, sorry, these are just tools. These are windows that allow you to get access to tools that you are familiar with, such as, color mixers or color preset default swatches, the free transform tool, alignment, and so on. So these tools are not something new to you. If you have worked with Adobe InDesign and you have done animations in Adobe InDesign, which, by the way, is something we're going to be doing at some point this semester. If you have done it, if you took a graphic design class before, you might have seen this. If you haven't, then this is exciting because it's really, really good stuff to create interactive e-publications and such. So you will recognize these these presets here, and the presets are basically for animation motion presets that you can apply to objects. You also have a brushes library, and you have a lot of tools that are across all of the programs that are available to you to have quick access to things that you know from other programs. You have a set of new tools up here in between your timeline and your stage area, and these, like I said before, these over here, all these tools are related to the environment down here on the timeline. So it's basically timeline control. Among them, you have things that you might have seen before, such as playback, play forward, step 1 frame back, step 1 frame forward. You also have the looping tool, but these over here allow you to edit multiple frames, which in turn means you can use them for onion skinning. And this is something that is extremely useful when working with frame-to-frame animation. Some of you might have done this on paper in your experimental animation class. In this class, you will make use of that knowledge, because it allows you to expand on that by digitally creating everything from scratch on an environment that you can export directly instead of having to scan. And in some instances, if you are equipped with a proper Wacom tablet, it will create very natural looking drawings that allow you to compare almost to what you have had hand drawn in the past. So very cool tools over here to work with. All the other tools that you see, this basically expands the size of your frames, so you can make them larger or smaller depending on how you like working. You can also right click on the layers and go to their properties and change properties for those layers from in there. So if you don't like the size of the layers, they're too small for you, you can always increase them in size, and you'll notice that they get twice as big. I prefer to work with mine at 100%. You also have the ability to create new layers from here. You can create folders to organize layers, which is extremely helpful because, as you probably imagined, a second ago I just described the example of working with one arm. So if you have one arm, it's 3 pieces that you have 3 layers to just simply create one arm. Now imagine if you're trying to create an entire body, you're going to end up with a lot of layers. So it is useful to subdivide things into frames so that we can collapse those frames, because as you can see, we can quickly run out of real estate as we are creating different pieces that we're going to be animating. Also, it helps us because sometimes we'd say, for example, animate backgrounds, and we're done with the animation in the background. We don't want to make a mistake and select the wrong thing. Then we might want to pack all of those things that we have already finished animating, put them into a folder, and then lock the folder by using the locking option. That will allow us to keep on working on top of our background without actually accidentally selecting a background item and making changes. You also have the ability to make things show only as outlines if they are outline created, meaning if they're vector based. And by the way, the core of this program, the core of Animate CC, is vector based. So if you're working, you can import files, you can import bitmap images and sounds and videos, but the core of the program is to try to convert everything towards vector when it exports. Because of this, you can work seamlessly in a workflow that comes from items, objects that come from a program like Illustrator, or you can create your own within Animate CC. When it comes to bitmaps, it treats them as imported files, and it treats them completely differently. So you can convert actually bitmaps into vector files, but that is something that we're going to be talking about next week. And you have the ability also to organize things by working with layer connection parentings. You can create cameras here, so you have the ability to work in 3D. And you also have the ability to work with, if you want to get deeper into a layer, or if you want to create specific animation, controlled animation within a layer, you have what would be called a motion graph in other programs. So if you've worked with After Effects, for example, this is the in-depth motion graph that we see in After Effects. It's also available here in Adobe Animate. One last tool before we end this video. One thing that I find, something that is very common is that you zoom in or you move things around like this, and then you get lost and you're trying to move, these handles to get your screen center. That became such a nuisance that people complained constantly to Adobe. So what they ended up doing is creating a button that allows you to center your stage. So if, for example, if I go ahead and move this here and I'm having a hard time centering, all I need to do is click up here, and that brings my stage to the center based on the size of my pasteboard. So based on that, I can go ahead and resize my pasteboard, and anytime I need to bring in my stage on focus, I simply click on that button. There's a shortcut for it as well, which is Control 0 or Command 0 on the Mac. So you can do that as well, but in case you don't remember the shortcuts, then you can also use the little center stage button here that allows you to work with that perfectly. And this is a new feature, which is, I think, is one of the greatest things they've added. I know it's a small thing, but in the past, the only differentiator between our pasteboard and our stage was simply that they changed color. That was the only thing that was different. So if you picked a color on the background that was the same as the color of the background for your stage, that was the same as the color as the pasteboard. Let's say, for example, let me do that right now. I'm going to click off here, and I'm going to change my stage color by picking a color, and I'm going to simply select that pasteboard. You'll notice that I only have this tiny little thin line that differentiates from the background. So it's problematic to know where my stage starts or where it ends. And so in the past, we had animations that would go on, and some of the students would try to animate something, and they would start halfway through the intersection between those two areas, and so it looked like the animation was cut off. In order to avoid that, they've added this little feature here that allows you to clip whatever is not on the stage. So because we don't have anything right now, it won't show. But let me quickly select a circle, create a circle that is half in and half out, and when I clip it, it shows me only what is going to be visible when I export this file. So when I send this out to an applet or to an animation for the web or to a video, that is what I will see. Whatever is clipped off is not visible. This came to this program from InDesign. So if you have worked in InDesign, you know how to literally narrow just your print area. And so you can go ahead and simply turn that off, turn off anything that's not in the print area, and that's the pasteboard. Whatever is outside of the non-printing area is the pasteboard. So it's an extremely useful tool to work with. A lot of people I know are working with this on at all times, so that way they have a visual as to what goes on within their stage. But you can see how that can be problematic as well, because if I draw something, let's say here, I know there's a circle there. I just drew it, but I don't see it because that is turned on. When I turn it off, there it is. So it can be useful just to constantly check what you have on the screen. So that, in a nutshell, it's a short intro to the interface. Remember, a lot of the tools work the same way as they do in other Adobe programs. So you will find that there is a lot of commonalities amongst the programs. One thing that is important to remember is that these little things with the triangles, the tools with the little triangles, if you long press on them, you will notice that they reveal extra menus. And that's very important to remember. Remember that we get access to extra tools that in the case of this program, we will be constantly jumping from and to amongst those menus. So it's something to remember. Long pressing on one of those items that has the little white arrow at the bottom right indicates that there's more tools underneath that tool. So make sure that you keep that in mind. Sometimes I quickly switch between tools and some students get lost. Just know that I probably went in there and quickly just long pressed and let go on the other one, simply switch the tool fairly fast. So it's something to keep in mind. I will go slower, but in some instances, especially when we get a little bit more advanced, I will be jumping a little fast. So make sure that you keep that in mind. So this is, like I said, a brief introduction to the interface. We're going to be talking a lot more in detail about document types that you can create here, workspaces, color settings, and the differences between working in objects or working in drawings or importing objects from Illustrator or Photoshop and so on as we progress throughout the semester. So like I said, just brief introduction to the program. And hopefully this will get you excited and thinking of possibilities of things that we can work on for this class.